here, and then she's here. Welcome to my show. I'm Barrie-Louise Switzen. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives. My guest is Ellen Perlman, who is editor-in-chief of Home PC. And Ellen, thank you for joining me today.
You're very welcome. Pleased to be here.
Thank you. I'm glad you could make it. Give us a little bit about your background.
Well, I've been in publishing for 20 years, and right now I'm the editor-in-chief of Home PC. I've been in computer publishing for several years, and I've also been in charge of health publications, financial publications, and in a former life, I was a first-grade teacher.
How did you go from being a first-grade teacher to the world of publishing?
Well, it was an indirect route. I stopped teaching to have my family, to raise my children. And when I decided to go back to work, I did not want to go back to school and work with children. I wanted to work with adults. And just accidentally found a job in publishing.
That's terrific.
And that was the beginning of a new career.
Now, you've won an award, a few awards.
Yes, I'm very proud of some awards. The magazine was chosen as the best broad interest magazine at the Computer Press Awards last year. And I've also won an award. Marketing Computers does a list of the most influential journalists in computer publishing, and I was one of the journalists selected.
Congratulations. How did you feel when you won it?
Great. And of course I had to look at the list and see how many men were on the list, how many women were on the list. So it was an honor because it is a tough field for women to break through.
Now, talking about breaking through, in the 70s, women were just trying to break through. They were pioneering and getting going. How do you find men reacting today to the women versus in the 1970s?
Well, today men accept that women are in the business world. It's not unusual. In the 70s, I'd say every meeting that I went to, I was the sole woman there. I'm still in a minority, but it's not as obvious as it was back in the 70s. And it was difficult, just relating to each other. Men and women were used to relating to each other socially, but not in business.
So you had a lot of communication problems?
Certainly communication problems, and also I had to learn how to adjust to it. It was very important to me to be very businesslike. I would say I went overboard being extremely professional in every business situation. I never wanted anything to be misconstrued. So
Right.
Today I can be much more casual. I don't worry about that. But in the 70s, I was very, very cautious about being too friendly, that somebody might misconstrue that.
I think that's still an issue about being too friendly because of the sexual harassment issues coming up today.
Absolutely.
As never before, I think people are being more attuned to it. And in fact, I got a card and they said, is it politically correct if I say Happy Valentine's Day, or if it's politically correct, or Merry Christmas, or whatever? People are really becoming more attuned to it. Do you find that because you were so conscious of the way you were acting at work, it also carried over into your social life as far as communicating with men?
I don't think so. I mean, I was married very young, so my social life revolved around a family life. And maybe if I were single, it would have been different. But it really was not so much of a problem. Although I'd say probably throughout my career and my personal life, I've felt somewhat schizophrenic. Being very, very driven in the workday, and then, coming home and switching hats and trying to balance the role of wife and mother. That's always been tricky.
Well, the women that were pioneers in the 70s, would you say that, since you're saying schizophrenia, I was going to say burnout, or were they having a lot more stress than normal put on them at that time?
Oh, I think it was tremendous stress. We had no role models. There was nobody who had done it before us. So everything was new. I was in a women's group, and actually we still get together. We call ourselves the longest running women's group in New York. I'm not sure if that's true, but it's a good 25 years. And part of it was to give each other support. We didn't know how to do it, so it was very, very stressful.
Do you think some of those barriers still exist?
There's no question that barriers still exist. I had this conversation recently with a male executive, and I was explaining to him that in a work environment, a woman in my position and in many other positions like this, you're aware of the fact that you're not part of the club. And he was trying to understand what I meant by the club, and he really didn't get it. And at one point I realized I just had to back off the conversation, because if I said that to you, you would have instantly understood what I meant by not being part of the club. The fact that he didn't understand it was because he doesn't have that issue. He is in the majority.
And
He's is not in the
he is the club.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Do you find that, or did you find that the men, let's say in the 70s, were part of the club because they were into team sports, they went into the military, so they learned how to be team players, so to speak, and it was a male environment, and here you're invading their territory?
Oh, absolutely. In many meetings, the guys literally are talking about sports. So that, always
separates you.
Definitely. And for a lot of women who've moved up the ladder in corporate America, they've had to get past that by learning more about it so that they could fit in. So there was definitely that issue. The other part of that is men, through sports, through the military, through being competitive and also learning how to handle teams, they carry that into the workplace. If they're trying to get something accomplished, they'll huddle together privately in groups and pitch an idea to somebody. They'll work those relationships. And for a lot of women, that doesn't come intuitively. You really have to learn how to do that. And it's not instinctual for a lot of us.
Probably also because we're not used to huddling, so to speak, but there's not another woman that you can really huddle with. So it's difficult in that respect.
Right. You have to huddle with the guys, and then you have to learn how to do that. Women also of my generation learned to be nurturers. We got points for making other people look good, not for making ourselves look good.
So it's detrimental to us in one respect, but on the other hand, it works wonders in other situations.
Yes, and that in a sense is part of the stress that we face, constantly battling what we were raised to do and what we're doing now.
Do you find a lot of that still exists? They're still huddling and excluding women?
I think that men are certainly open now to including women, and with a lot of diversity efforts going on in the workplace, there is that acknowledgement that women and minorities need to be brought in. But the fact that these initiatives exist make it clear that it's not an easy transition.
Let me ask you, when you were back in the 70s, let's go back there for a second, did you find that you had more problems with the men who were like in their 50s and 60s while you were in, let's say, 20s and 30s versus the men that were your contemporaries?
I think it was definitely easier with men who were my contemporaries. The men who were older had absolutely no experience with women in the workforce, and definitely were a bit more uncomfortable with it. But I wouldn't say it was so easy with men of my generation either, because this was all new turf. And it wasn't only their discomfort. I had to deal with a lot of my own issues. I remember one interview I had early on, one of the first interviews where I was interviewing an investment banker at one of the top firms on Wall Street, and I was warned by my editor that he was known for being a womanizer.
Oh, lovely.
And so I was very nervous. I was very young, and when I got there and we started talking, we were going to have a lunch meeting at the firm, and he suggested that maybe we go out to a restaurant. And I said, no, I'd rather do it here. I was afraid to move it off-site.
Right.
And after the hour and a half that I spent with him, I realized when it was all done, he never did anything that, he shouldn't have. He never made a pass. He never said anything. And I came home that night and I thought, gee, what's wrong with me?
You were disappointed.
And on some level I was. So, there's always that balancing act of, that sort of how we grew up and how we're trying to deal in the workforce.
Do you find that the advantages and the disadvantages of being a pioneer woman in the 70s has helped or hindered women of the 90s?
Well, in some ways it's an asset because the women who have made it in business and they are in positions of authority, very often the companies they're with look to those women to be role models in their organization. And that has certainly happened with me. So it's an opportunity to be a mentor. And because there aren't as many women of my generation, we do tend to rise to the top, and it gives us a certain power base in the companies we're in. So it can definitely be an asset.
I think that's terrific because women need to be brought up and know how to do it. How has your family reacted to you being in the business world?
They've been incredibly supportive. I couldn't ask for more. It's freed my husband up to be able to work at home and do some things that he might not have done if I had taken a more traditional path. My kids have been great, and I think I've been a role model for my daughter. So she's been able to go out, and she's a lawyer now. And I'm sure that part of it is, she just grew up with my being out in the workforce, and she got used to it. My son, in fact, calls my husband when he's cooking to ask him for recipes. So it's been great for all of us.
What a switch.
Yep.
That's terrific.
Yep.
Well, Ellen, we're going to just take a break right now, and we'll be right back. We'll be right back.
Please stay tuned. You are watching The Woman's Connection.
Welcome back. My guest is Ellen Perlman, Editor-in-Chief of Home PC Magazine. Ellen, would you say that women take more risks or men take more risks in their career?
Oh, definitely men. I think that's been a real problem for women. Women have a hard time taking risks. They like to be more secure, and I think that really can hold a woman back. One of the reasons why I think I've been able to move along is I was willing to move from one job that was safe and secure into another that was new and scared me to death. But I always had someone behind me, sort of pushing, saying, you can do it. So having a mentor helps.
Now, did you say when you were put into this new job or you accepted a new job, did you say, oh, I can't do it? Or did you say, sure, I'll do it, and go home and say, oh my God, how am I going to do this?
Well, it's gotten easier with time. The first time that I was asked to run a publication, I was really nervous about accepting it. And at that point, I let the person know who offered it to me, and he was the one that kept pushing me to take it.
That's wonderful.
And he was great. Over the years, when new things have come up, it hasn't been as difficult, and my anxieties were anxieties that I would voice to my husband, but not at the office. And at this point, it really does become easier. That's the thing I found. Things that make you nervous earlier in your career, the more you do them, the more you take chances, the easier it gets. And at this point, I don't mind taking risks at all. In fact, I enjoy it.
So almost like the risks aren't risks. They're just an everyday occurrence to you.
Now it's a challenge because when you're managing things, you're making decisions all the time. So you do have to take risks. You can't play it safe.
What advice would you give to a woman on how to take a risk? Is there such a way?
Well, I basically would urge someone to say, you've got to take a chance. The worst thing that can happen is it doesn't work out. And I discovered you learn more from a failure than you do from a success. So it's not a negative to have something not work out. You learn from it, you pick yourself up, you go on to the next thing. You get points for trying.
I was talking to a woman and she said in America, you get points for trying, exactly what you were saying, whereas in Europe, you're frowned upon, which is interesting in the different cultures.
Well, it's true. I mean, Americans, you can raise money as an entrepreneur, even if your business has failed several times. You're a better risk, in a sense, than somebody who never tries. So, people
Well,
are
let's go
looked
out.
at positively for doing that.
Let's talk about pet peeves in the workplace with men. Now, one of my pet peeves is men are always interrupting. And I find that I could be in a board meeting or even on the street talking to some fellow worker and they're going to interrupt me. Now, I don't know if this is indicative of the culture or just me that like to interrupt me. I don't know. Of course, then again, I found out how to curtail that, and I just remain extremely silent, and I don't say a word, and then I'll say, well, go ahead. And I get really put out, and I'll say, it's okay, I don't want to interrupt your interruption. So it really cuts the conversation
Very effective.
short. Right. Do you have any pet peeves?
That one is not mine particularly. Mine is that men tend to, you always get the feeling that the guy is much busier than you are,
Right.
because they cut you off, and after a certain amount of time, they're doing something else, they're getting up from their desk, they're moving on. At times, it's actually quite rude. I find women tend to do something like that a lot less. Women are much more willing to let somebody finish what they're saying and to give their attention. Men just, maybe they have shorter attention
I was just
spans.
going to say, it sounds like it. And say, okay, is there anything else? And then I get restless.
Yeah, absolutely. That I find very difficult.
What would you say your definition of power is?
I think power is being able to impact change, and being able to alter the direction of something and make it happen.
Do you find women are becoming more powerful?
I think they are. As they move into management positions, they are. But you have to be able to move into those management positions to have the power.
One thing that's been said to me, well, several times, is that women don't like to help other women. Now, I'm the first one to help everybody, and yet there are women that I've seen who won't help other women. Have you come across this?
My issue was that there weren't women to go to because they just weren't there.
Right.
So it wasn't a question of they're not helping, they were nowhere to be found. I haven't found it the case that women don't want to help other women. I think my generation in particular, I think we enjoy being mentors. So I don't know if that will continue to be a problem. The only thing I did find several years ago, we had started a women's group at my company to support other women. And I found that some of the women who were very aggressive and go-getters didn't stay with it. And I think part of it was they didn't really want to be involved in a group of women where it may have been perceived that women were sort of complaining or whining. It wasn't a power kind of situation.
Coffee clutch.
Yeah, and I find that some women who are very powerful, they won't give any time to anything that doesn't feel like it's a power situation. So offline, they might help somebody one-on-one, but they might not want to be associated with a group of women trying to work to succeed.
Is it because they're too busy also, or is it
Part
more
of
power?
it. Part of it. I think it is an issue of time. That's one of the real downsides of moving up in the business world and succeeding. You end up with very little personal time. And that is a trade-off. Some women leave that environment and start their own businesses because they don't want that. They don't want to lose out on that private time with their families.
If they're going to lose out on the private time for a company, they might as well lose out on the private time for their own company.
That's right. That's right. So. And I think for some women, they feel if they're going to make these sacrifices, they want those rewards.
I don't blame them.
Yeah.
It's a big reward.
And big risk.
True, true. What are some of the faux pas women commit in business?
I think a lot of it sort of it all sort of revolves around a similar kind of thing in my experience. It's sort of apologizing. Gee, I'm sorry, I should have done this, or maybe this will be okay. It's coming at it with sort of
little girl.
Yeah,
no power.
Instead of coming out in a very positive, knowing you've done it right and not apologizing if you haven't. Men don't point out their shortcomings. Women are much more readily offering that to somebody. Oh, this isn't exactly what I hope this will be okay. So it's that kind of apology that women come out with. Women have to learn not to do that.
How do that so it comes out positive, even though they know it's not what the person asked for?
You don't have to explain why something isn't what was expected.
Mm-hmm.
You just, in a sense, you just overlook it. you come out, I think this, this will be, this is what you want. This is, and you point out the strengths of what you've done. And you don't point out the weaknesses. If they're there and they see them, they'll find them. You don't.
And they'll point them out for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's always putting it in the positive light.
Yeah.
And if you have a problem, you don't go to somebody with a problem. You go to somebody with a solution. So rather than saying, gee, this is a problem. I've noticed that this, and this, isn't being done well. Come at it on a positive statement. I've noticed that this is happening. This is the procedure we're doing. I think it might work better if we did it this way. And you give your reasons. So instead of coming with a problem that you've now laid in someone's lap to solve, you come out looking stronger and more positive, because if it is truly a problem and your solution is good, you can get credit for the solution.
Getting credit. Give women a lot of credit, or do they take it themselves?
It's a little tricky here to make a statement, but I've been worked with men in the workforce who are wonderful at giving women credit, with other men who they're very quick to a problem and take credit, case by case kind of thing, I think are very credit for their eyes. And that can be watered down sense, be it by saying, oh, that person did it, and you're sort of saying it. So it's a tricky, often are very much consensus and like to have a team. And I believe in that, and I think it's a very strong thing, but you also have to be willing to be the leader and make those decisions.
It's very difficult.
Either doing things that go in your intuitive grain,
right,
where it gets tricky. In a sense, you almost alter your behavior sometimes. Early on in the first time I went into a boss and said I thought I deserved, or afraid I would cry. Because if I had to talk to myself before I went in and sort of, harden myself to think of something, if I felt myself getting emotional, to try and stop myself.
I want to hear more about how you did that, but we have to stop.